Welcome. This channel brings you daily motivation and uplifting sermons. Subscribe now. And together let's reach 1,000 subscribers while building a positive, inspiring community.
The steady hum of the Calcari command ship's engines filled the control chamber. Over a dozen officers were present, Calcarian warriors with sharp, chitinous armor plates and eyes like polished obsidian. They stood at their stations, hands moving over translucent control panels as they monitored the invasion's progress. At the center of the chamber, Supreme Overlord Vrexix leaned over the main display, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. "Report," he barked, his voice deep and metallic. A junior officer quickly responded. "Blacks and pods are on final approach, Overlord. They will make planetfall in one rotation. Surface resistance is minimal." The planet below Terra 7 hung in the viewport like a pale blue marble, its atmosphere faintly glowing. The world was not particularly remarkable. It wasn't home to the sprawling megacities of the core worlds or the ancient temples of the Galactic Rim. Instead, it was an out-of-the-way human colony with settlements scattered across its land masses, interconnected by thin threads of roads and small industrial hubs. The Calcari had chosen it for one reason: strategic location. Terra 7 sat at a critical juncture of trade routes, and its capture would ensure dominance over the sector. But the Calcari weren't interested in drawn-out sieges or prolonged campaigns. Their approach was simple: overwhelm, subjugate, and claim. That's where the blacks and beasts came in. These were no ordinary war machines. They were bioengineered monstrosities, each the size of a skyscraper, bred in vats and enhanced with cybernetic implants. Their primary purpose was to break the spirit of resistance before it could even form. As the first wave of pods broke through Terra 7's atmosphere, they looked like flaming meteors streaking across the sky. Colonists, working in fields or loading transports at mining depots, paused and looked upward in awe and fear. The pod struck the ground with tremendous force, sending shockwaves across the landscape. Out of each pod emerged a Blackson 6 powerful limbs, a scaly hide that shimmered with implanted energy shields, and eyes glowing a menacing red. They were killing machines, programmed to seek and destroy all forms of resistance. At first, the plan seemed to be working. The beasts rampaged through the outskirts of settlements, tearing through hastily erected defenses and scattering local militias. Civilians fled to underground shelters or to the forests and mountains that dotted the planet. The Calcari in orbit watched with satisfaction as reports of human casualties streamed in. Supreme Overlord Vrexix allowed himself a moment of pride. This would be a quick and decisive conquest. But then something unexpected happened. The beasts began behaving strangely. It started subtly hesitations in their attacks, moments where they stopped and scanned the environment as if confused. Within hours, entire packs of Blackson stopped following their programmed paths. In one settlement, a beast that had been in the midst of crushing a storage silo suddenly froze, its limbs twitching spasmodically. In another, a group of Blackson turned away from their targets entirely and began wandering aimlessly into the nearby hills. From orbit, the Calcari commanders were perplexed. The junior officer at Vrexix's side stammered. "Overlord, the creatures are not following directives. Some are standing still, others are retreating. And we've lost contact with at least 3 units." "Impossible," Vrexix snapped. "They were tested on dozens of worlds. The programming is flawless. Yet the live feeds from the planet didn't lie. The mighty Blackson creatures that had never failed to break a planetary defense were faltering. Worse still, the humans were adapting. They weren't simply running in panic anymore. Instead, makeshift defense lines were forming, and reports of human counterattacks started to trickle in. The Calcari's initial confidence began to waver. A communications officer broke the tense silence. "Overlord, the humans are using localized EM pulses. They appear to have discovered a way to disrupt the creature's neural links. And there's something in the soil fungal growths interacting with the beast's bioorganic systems. It's causing neurological interference." Vrexix's mandibles clicked furiously. "Fungal growths? You mean some primitive organism on this backwater world is interfering with my beasts? Why yes, Overlord. It appears to be endemic to Terra 7's ecosystem. Vrexix turned his attention back to the main display, his eyes narrowing. The humans were not the weak, easily dominated prey he had expected. They were resilient, innovative. And now, they had not only survived the Kalkari's initial assault, but they were turning the tide. The Overlord's triumph was turning into a challenge, one that might reshape the balance of power in the sector. As the Kalkari command ship hung in orbit, its officers now scrambled to understand what had gone wrong. In their overconfidence, they had underestimated both the planet and the people who called it home. The first time one of the Blackson fell, it was pure accident. A group of colonists had been retreating from a rampaging beast near one of Terra 7's mining hubs. With no weapons strong enough to penetrate the creature's armored hide, they focused only on staying ahead of its thunderous steps. In their scramble, they stumbled through an abandoned power station that still had a few functioning generators. Desperate and out of options, one colonist activated the station's grid, hoping to create a barrier that might slow the beast down. As the creature passed through the zone, a surge of electromagnetic energy from the outdated equipment caused it to falter. The Blackson's massive limbs twitched uncontrollably, its movements stuttering like a glitching machine. Moments later, it collapsed to the ground, shuddering as its neural network short-circuited. The colonists froze, unsure what had just happened. But as the massive beast lay inert before them, realization dawned. They didn't need firepower to stop these creatures. They needed ingenuity. Word spread quickly. While the initial Kalkari assault had sent many colonists into hiding, small groups began to venture out again. Engineers, scientists, and survivalists pooled their knowledge. They discovered that Terra 7's unique biosphere held a key advantage. The local fungus and unassuming growth, long thought of as just another pest, produced trace compounds that interfered with the Blackson's bio-augmented neural pathways. When concentrated and applied in specific ways, the fungi-derived agents could disrupt the beast's motor functions. In an underground workshop beneath one of the smaller settlements, a group of engineers worked around the clock to refine the fungus into a usable tool. They synthesized a crude spray weapon that delivered the spores directly into the creature's respiratory vents. It wasn't elegant, and it wasn't guaranteed to work every time, but it was something. More importantly, it gave the colonists hope, and that hope quickly spread. Meanwhile, another group of settlers experimented with electromagnetic traps. Using scavenged power cells from old mining drills and solar arrays, they constructed makeshift EM generators that could emit short but intense pulses. These devices were set up in strategic choke points near the settlements, hidden beneath camouflage nets and debris piles. When triggered, the pulses sent the Blackson into fits of confusion. Some collapsed immediately, their immense bodies spasming uncontrollably. Others, temporarily blinded, began lashing out in all directions, causing collateral damage that ironically helped the humans by tearing down Kalkari-installed relay towers and outposts. What had been a one-sided assault turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Blackson, still formidable in strength, weren't so much defeated as defanged. They remained terrifying opponents, but the humans now knew how to fight them, how to turn the beast's own enhancements against them. And that shift in balance emboldened the colonists. Small strike teams formed, armed not with military-grade weaponry but with ingenious traps, portable spore sprayers, and signal disruptors. They struck under the cover of darkness, laying ambushes in the dense forested regions and the narrow ravines near the mining complexes. The Kalkari, who had been monitoring the situation from orbit, struggled to keep up. Their warlord overlords grew increasingly frustrated with the reports coming in. These humans should have been pacified by now, bellowed Supreme Overlord Vrexix, his claws digging into the console's edge. Explain to me how farmers and laborers are outmaneuvering trained Kalkari commanders. His officers avoided eye contact, but one finally spoke. Overlord, the planet itself seems to be fighting with them. The local flora of the fungi is compromising the Blackson. And the humans are remarkably adaptive. They've developed tactics we hadn't anticipated. Then develop countermeasures. Vrexix roared. Use firebombs to burn these fungi. Deploy more beasts. I don't care if we have to raise the entire surface. But even as the Kalkari scrambled to suppress the human resistance, they found themselves on the defensive. What should have been a quick conquest became a drawn-out campaign of attrition. Each new wave of Blackson sent down to the surface was met with more sophisticated traps. Each attempt to destroy the fungal growths backfired, as burning them released spores into the air that further disoriented the beasts. Kalkari soldiers on the ground reported increasing difficulty in maintaining control of the beasts, and morale among their ranks began to falter. The humans, meanwhile, gained more confidence with every small victory. They scavenged Kalkari tech from downed relay stations and damaged warships, reverse engineering what they could. They learned to manipulate the beast's signal frequencies, jamming Kalkari commands, or even, in a few rare cases, redirecting the beast's aggression back toward Kalkari outposts. The settlers who had once been victims of an unstoppable invasion now saw themselves as guerrilla fighters in a war of liberation. As the tide turned, one message began to spread among the human settlers: we can win. The Kalkari's reinforcements arrived in waves, dropping from orbit in massive, glimmering carriers that seemed to blot out Terra 7's sky. The warlords had underestimated the humans once, and they were determined not to repeat that mistake. This time, they didn't rely solely on the Blackson beasts. Advanced ground forces, fortified command bunkers, and precision bombardments were unleashed to extinguish the human resistance. At first, it seemed the tide might turn back in the Kalkari's favor. Villages were destroyed outright, fungal-rich zones were firebombed, and whole swaths of territory were reclaimed. But the humans didn't crumble. Instead, they adapted faster than anyone expected. They shifted from defense to offense. And they had unexpected help. When the second wave of Blackson was deployed, something strange happened. The beasts, exposed to the now widespread spores and the electromagnetic traps seeded across the planet, began to behave erratically. Some turned on each other. Others simply stopped following Kalkari commands. The more the warlords deployed, the less control they seemed to have. And then the turning point came: the humans captured a Blackson alive. It happened near the edge of Terra 7's largest mining complex, where a well-coordinated group of colonists lured a lone beast into a narrow ravine filled with hidden EM traps. Once the creature collapsed, they quickly moved in. Engineers and biologists, working side by side, began analyzing the beast's cybernetic implants and bioengineered brain. What they discovered was a series of complex control nodes that could theoretically be hacked if the right frequency patterns were found. The colonists had already been experimenting with signal jamming. Now they sought to go a step further. Instead of disabling the creatures, they wanted to take over their control entirely. The Kalkari warlords, unaware of this breakthrough, continued to press their attack. But now, whenever they dropped more beasts onto the surface, a strange pattern emerged. Here and there, one of the beasts would falter, stumble, and then turn on its handlers. Human strike teams began appearing in unexpected locations, ambushing Kalkari patrols and sabotaging supply lines. The humans were no longer just defending their settlements, they were spreading outward, forcing the Kalkari to overextend their forces. What puzzled the Kalkari commanders most was the increasing precision of the human attacks. Supply depots that had been carefully hidden were somehow discovered and destroyed. Mobile command units were assaulted at the exact moment their support squads were away. Entire platoons were routed by perfectly timed counterattacks. What the Kalkari didn't know was that the humans had started to access the Blackson's own internal reconnaissance systems. By partially hacking the beast's neural pathways, the colonists gained a crude but effective intelligence network, using the creature's advanced sensory arrays to track enemy movements. Back in their underground shelters, human engineers were working on an even more ambitious plan. If they could fully override a beast's control systems, they might be able to field their own tamed Blackson in battle. This work was risky, requiring a mix of trial-and-error hacking and rapid fungal adaptation. But the effort paid off. The first captured Blackson, nicknamed Strider by the colonists, was successfully reprogrammed. When Strider stormed into a Kalkari forward base and destroyed it in minutes, the entire rebellion felt a surge of hope. If one beast could be turned, more could follow. By now, the Kalkari warlords were in disarray. Their supply lines were in shambles. Their command structures were compromised. The Blackson, once the ultimate weapon, were now a liability. But retreat was unthinkable. To abandon Terra 7 after committing so many resources would be a humiliation that could destabilize the Kalkari's hold over other contested worlds. Yet, every day they remained on the planet only deepened their losses. The humans, for their part, began to organize more formally. Leaders from scattered settlements held clandestine meetings in hidden tunnels and caves. They formed a new council, choosing representatives based not on rank or titles, but on proven merit and bravery. The council helped coordinate the growing rebellion, distributing resources and setting strategies. With their newly tamed beasts and the now constant fungal interference, the humans launched a series of bold strikes. They recaptured critical industrial hubs, reclaimed key transit routes, and even managed to shoot down one of the Kalkari's smaller troop transports using salvaged orbital weaponry. And then came the broadcast. Using captured Kalkari equipment, the Human Council sent a defiant message into space, addressing the Kalkari warlords directly. In it, they declared that Terra 7 was no longer just a colony, it was a free world. They demanded the immediate withdrawal of all Kalkari forces and warned that any further attacks would be met with even greater resistance. The broadcast spread like wildfire through the Confederation of Sentient Species. Other human colonies, long subdued by Kalkari intimidation, began to stir. On distant worlds, whispers of rebellion grew louder. The Kalkari's response was swift and brutal. They launched an all-out offensive, deploying every resource they had left. It was meant to be a crushing blow, the kind that would erase any doubts about their supremacy. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. For the humans of Terra 7, the time had come to end the invasion once and for all. The final Kalkari assault began at dawn, their shadowy warships darkening the horizon as they poured their last reserves into one overwhelming strike. Columns of troops, heavy walkers, and the few remaining Blackson war beasts advanced in unison, seeking to reclaim the scattered settlements that had become the heart of the human resistance. It was a calculated risk. The Kalkari believed that if they could crush the human rebellion in one decisive push, they could salvage their crumbling hold on the region. But Terra 7's colonists were ready. Weeks of victories, however small, had forged them into a disciplined and fiercely determined force. Every human fighter now carried a makeshift EM disruptor or a spore-based weapon. Supply caches were carefully hidden, safe havens mapped out, and every defensive perimeter was bolstered with stolen Kalkari tech. The colonists' leaders had also spent the preceding days coordinating a bold strategy, luring the Kalkari into a carefully planned trap. As the Kalkari forces swept into the Central Plains, seemingly encountering only sporadic resistance, they didn't realize they were walking into the jaws of a coordinated ambush. The human militia, now well-versed in the beast's behavior, used electromagnetic pulses to funnel the remaining Blackson into narrow gorges. The creatures, already weakened by the planet's spores, were bombarded with concentrated fungal munitions, rendering them sluggish and disoriented. The few that made it through the kill zones were set upon by teams of colonists armed with a combination of homemade explosives and repurposed Kalkari plasma weapons. One by one, the mighty beasts fell, their towering forms collapsing in thunderous crashes that echoed across the landscape. For the first time since the invasion began, the humans had eliminated every deployed Blackson in a single engagement. But their work wasn't done. The real test came when the Kalkari infantry, believing they were finally rid of the Blackson's weaknesses, pressed forward into the settlement's outskirts. These were the elite forces, battle-hardened and equipped with the best armor and weapons the Kalkari could muster. Yet even their advanced technology was no match for Terra 7's terrain and the humans' ingenuity. The settlers led them into choke points, mining tunnels, and forested ravines. Ambushes erupted from the tree lines, hidden traps tore apart armored columns. Every step forward was costly, every kilometer gained soaked in Kalkari blood. Meanwhile, above the planet, the Kalkari fleet faced its own reckoning. Using reverse-engineered Kalkari communication systems, the humans had managed to hack into one of the warlords' orbital relays, causing chaos among the invading armada. False orders sent ships to the wrong sectors, while sudden power surges disabled key command systems. In one desperate countermeasure, the humans launched crude but effective missiles constructed from repurposed mining drones into Kalkari carriers, causing catastrophic damage. The orbital battlefield was no longer a safe haven for the warlords, it was a liability. By midday, the Kalkari advance had ground to a halt. What was supposed to be a swift, overwhelming offensive had turned into a grueling, costly slog. Reports from the front lines grew more dire. Supply lines were severed, command units eliminated, and morale among the Kalkari troops plummeted. Even their elite soldiers, bred for victory, began to falter under the constant onslaught. Many retreated to makeshift fortifications, digging in and hoping for reinforcements that would never come. The humans pushed forward. What had started as a defensive stand turned into a counteroffensive. Strike teams armed with Kalkari plasma rifles stormed enemy bunkers, capturing valuable equipment and liberating previously lost territories. In one particularly bold operation, a group of colonists infiltrated a Kalkari command outpost and seized a high-ranking officer, broadcasting his surrender to the entire sector. The psychological impact was devastating. In orbit, Supreme Overlord Vrexix stood on the bridge of his flagship, his claws trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He had poured every resource, every soldier, and every beast into this invasion. And yet, here he was, watching it all unravel. The humans, those primitive settlers he had once dismissed, were now turning his own forces against him. His officers avoided his gaze, but their silence said everything. They had lost control. The battle was no longer one they could win. By sunset, the Kalkari line collapsed. What remained of their forces retreated in disarray, pursued by emboldened human fighters. Scattered pockets of Kalkari resistance lingered, but the rebellion's leadership already knew the warlords would soon have no choice but to withdraw. Victory wasn't just within reach, it was inevitable. And yet, the victory came at a cost. The settlements lay in ruins. Hundreds of colonists had perished. But the humans understood what they had achieved. They hadn't just defended their home. They had shattered the myth of Kalkari invincibility. Terra 7, once a backwater colony, had become a beacon of resistance. Other human worlds began sending messages of solidarity. Even among other sentient species of the Confederation, whispers of rebellion grew louder. The Kalkari's chokehold on the galaxy was loosening, and Terra 7 was the spark that lit the fire. As the final Kalkari ships fled the system, Supreme Overlord Vrexix issued his last command, a full retreat. In that moment, he realized the true magnitude of his mistake. By underestimating Terra 7, by deploying the uncontrollable Blackson, he hadn't just failed to conquer the planet. He had armed the humans with knowledge, resilience, and a cause. The invasion was over, but its repercussions were only beginning. On Terra 7, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the colonists stood together on the plains that had been their battlefield. Tired, scarred, but victorious, they knew the fight wasn't truly over. The galaxy was vast, and the Kalkari would regroup elsewhere. But here, on this small blue world, the seeds of rebellion had been planted. And from those seeds, a movement would grow, one that would challenge the Kalkari's dominion and give hope to every world that yearned to be free. The warlords had thought they were teaching Terra 7 a lesson. Instead, it was the Kalkari who learned a painful truth: when faced with oppression, the unlikeliest of opponents can rise, adapt, and overcome. And in doing so, they can shake an empire to its core.